Hey there, friend. Welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast. We are launching into a new season here at the Doing What Matters podcast. I'm super excited. I shared on the podcast last week that going forward, we will now have, or I will now have, a co host. So I'm excited to welcome in my good friend, Erica Vinson. Erica, welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast.
Thank you, Teresa. It is so good to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
This is going to be super fun. And so, this is not just an opportunity for a one time thing going forward. Erica and I are both going to be on the podcast together each and every week. Last week on the podcast. So, if you want to go back one episode to 294, you can listen to some of that. And we're going to talk about that some today as well, as we just introduce you to this 2.0 version of the podcast. If you've never listened in before, we talk about living from rust, not rush. How do we do that as coaches, entrepreneurs, business owners, all the things, trying to bring our whole life together, both our being and our doing? How do we stay in that place of rust, not rush? And Erica, I know you've been on that journey yourself. We've been on this journey together. So before we dive too far, I just want to ask you, when I say that phrase, live from rust, not rush, what comes up for you?
Living from a place where I don't have to work toward freedom and vacation. And you and I used to use the phrase work to reward. And it was like, just grind it out until you get to that place where you can actually rest. And I really just want to have rhythms of rest that are consistent in my life now. So it's a natural part of the work that I do and the life that I live.
Yeah. So what does that mean to have rhythms that are consistent? What's that look like for you?
I think, on a weekend, just having days where I unplug, where there is a Sabbath type rhythm of just noting that I'm not answering emails. I'm not always responding to a notification that maybe comes from a client or work and not feeling badly about that. Actually
Mhm.
communicating that up front and just being proactive, which is a huge part of freedom for me to be able to embrace it, but also too, to have a start and stop time to work. And so knowing that as a single person, it's like you can work all hours of the night. And I don't want to live that way. I want to have a
Mhm.
good close of the day where I enjoy outside, being outdoors and sports and relationships and all of those things that it's not just a rare occurrence, but it's a part of something every day that I practice.
We work together in ministry, and for anyone that's listening and knows that space, that weekly flow is different because we did 10, 12 years together of a flow of Sunday was a work day. So we didn't really know a Sabbath day, even though the staff we worked on, we took Fridays off. I think that's probably where for you and I that work to reward place came from because it was Monday through really hard, or excuse me, one day, Monday through Thursday, really hard. And then we would take Fridays off. Lots of times we were still doing something back at church again, sometimes even on Saturday, even though it might have been more in a volunteer space. And then Sunday felt like a work day. So we just had this cycle of behavior. And I would say we've both really had to struggle with finding how that weekend looks different. We're 6 or 7 years past kind of some of that lifestyle, but it's funny how you just did that for so long, that became the pattern of behavior. That's part of our history together, and I misquoted last week, I'll be honest. I think I said 2009 on the episode last week, and it was actually 2006. Is that right?
Yeah, the six just got flipped.
Upside down. I always misquote wrong. I even think I said on last week's podcast that my book came out in 2023. And I think it came out in 2022. But yeah, I had all kinds of dates last time wrong. Anyway, all that to say, that was the pattern that we have. And so on these conversations, if you are someone that has flipped your life upside down, more in that place of, I don't know that I want to live in a external place of rush, but I want to choose to live from a place of rest. That is Eric and I's favorite topic. It's what we do all week long as we work with people, whether our private clients or the network of coaches and things that we work with. As we think back to that pattern, Erica, that we used to live in, and you just talked about one of the biggest changes being like stopping your workday. What's helpful for you when you think about setting up boundaries would be the right word? What do you find helpful in doing that?
Yeah.
So what's helpful for you?
What struck me as you were talking about ministry and we were just recalling is how much we allow organizations and our environment to set our rhythms. And so I think this is a whole different space. And so what's helpful is to remember that we get to choose, even if you work an 8 to 5, or if you're an entrepreneur in this season. Sometimes the biggest challenge is not having those boundaries for an entrepreneur to go, I don't have someone who's coming in and saying, hey, 5 o'clock quitting time and dinner has to be at this time. You can embrace actually resting after you cook a meal or go to dinner or whatever it is. You don't have to open the laptop back up and continue to work just because you don't have someone setting that structure. So you really get to choose the structure.
Yeah. And I think it works both ways, right? Because there are times, yesterday being an example for me, I worked till about 1:30 yesterday afternoon, and then I needed to do some grandma duty. And so I went home for a few hours, was able to do that, had dinner, all the things. It was late actually when we got done on the farm because we're in baling season. And then Dale and I had dinner together. And then I actually did pick the laptop back up and worked for about an hour till about 9 or so. So there's a freedom lifestyle that comes, but I do think it's hard sometimes to choose when am I going to work? When am I not going to work? When you have that ability to work whenever, because procrastination comes into play of I'll just put it off because I want to go do something fun. And then we never get to the work. So i- it's always a struggle, I think, for us in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. The flexibility is a blessing, but stewarding it and knowing even how you're wired and what you need to keep yourself moving forward is important.
So I want to talk a little bit because I know even since you left ministry, and just so listeners can get to know you a little bit, you've been a guest on the podcast many times, but just share a little bit of what's the journey that since you left full time ministry, your original career was in education and teaching. When we met, you had just stepped away from that because you'd moved to Effingham, Illinois. And what's been the journey?
I've leaned into just some curiosity that I had, knowing that, and God often works this way with me. I feel like there's not always this definitive. When I left ministry, I wanted to be able to tell people at church when they're like, what's next? I wanted to say, oh, NASA called and I'm actually going to be going to the moon in 2024 and I'm going to be the astronaut I always dreamed I would be. And I had no idea. I knew enough about myself that I love discovery and learning. And I knew I was finding a lot of value in being coached. And so I was curious. And I think that served me really well to just say, can I start this journey, take some courses, honor the learning and discovery that I want to continue to foster, and say, hey, I want to take a class a la carte and just see if this is a fit for me. And you were already diving into that space a couple of years ahead of me. And I had been coached by you. I'd been coached in a group
She
coaching
was.
program. I
Let's
was your
just make
first
that.
client. And so just finding a lot of value there and knowing that it was something that I thought, gosh, I really would love to hone some of the skills that coaching offers and know that they're really life skills too. And I've started to lean into that. Absolutely loved it because it was something that for me, I could not figure out. I'm a planner. I like strategy. It brings me safety, order, and harmony are a need of mine. And so I like a plan. And it was something that every time I stepped into the space, whether it was on a phone call or into a virtual room with a client, I had no idea what was going to happen. And so there was this exhilarating, I'm trusting the process and I'm trusting God. And I don't know if this client's going to get anything out of this. And so it's just been this huge journey of courage and one foot in front of the other. And I'm always astonished. And so I love seeing the transformation. And so coaching individuals, coaching in some groups, even with real life process just enjoying even seeing how God has brought forth some of what I wished I had as an athlete and the opportunity to work in the mindset space with some young athletes and just really serve what a younger version of myself would have loved to have companion in my journey.
Yeah. So, several things that you might have picked up on if you were listening and we were doing a quiz is Erica loves space and space travel. She will sign up if they ever offer trips or if she could afford one. Yes, we can go at this time, maybe. That's one thing. The other thing is you did do athletics as a kid, and I think tennis, some biking, different things, golf. Oh, yes, than I will ever be. And loves to play golf. So you love sports, and it's been fun for you as you've taken coaching skills and I remember when someone called me actually and said, "Do you coach kids?" I'm like, "No, I do not." But I think I know someone who this might be a really good fit for. And you were in the beginning of your coach training. Maybe you'd taken first class or finished up through the first class. But when we worked together in ministry, because of your education background, you were our children's pastor and I thought to myself, yeah, this could be a good fit. So I connected you guys, and you've been working in that space and really have grown that space. Gosh, 3 or 4 years now that you've worked
Mhm.
with young
Yeah.
athletes in a competitive, high competitive nature. And I love you said that's what I would have liked as a kid. I'd never really thought of it that way. And coaching adults too. You and I have such different personalities in just how we're wired through how we show up in the world. You much more from the head space, me much more from the heart space, that we coach totally differently and have different styles. But I think that's what makes the coaching industry just such a neat space is we work with a lot of coaches helping them grow their businesses. And I work with a lot of business owners as well. There's all kinds of room out there for all kinds of different coaches. What's your thoughts on that? Just as we think about all the different ways that even in the helping profession in general, there's all kinds of different ways that people show up and listen to each other's stories and help each other.
There are really, and I think our network was a place where I noticed that people will, our certified coaches that are part of that network will sign up and say, "Hey, I signed up for coaching with Teresa this month because I really want to work on my business model and my framework." And they know that it might be an area of expertise. So sometimes it's a expertise that a client will lean into. Sometimes it's just they need to be listened to. I think about even in relationships, sometimes we come and we just need to download and say, "Hey, I really don't need you to fix anything. I just need to say this out loud and hear myself say it." And so that's part of coaching too, is just allowing our clients to share and to mirror back and to hear themselves. And sometimes a client will say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or "What did I just say?" And so our strategy sessions sometimes are a blend of coaching and consulting. And so that consulting space is one where you're hired as an expert to give that maybe advice or that bigger picture feel, whereas therapy and counseling has that past hurts and hangups, the trauma, the different things that keep us moving forward that we go, "Oh, I didn't realize that was an obstacle." And then coaching can help to continue to move forward. And so it really just depends sometimes what season we're in, and sometimes multiple helping professions go hand in hand.
In our own journeys, all of those things, you and I both have had spiritual directors, we've had coaches, we've had counselors, therapists. It takes a lot to hold us together.
It takes a
Uh,
village.
it takes a village sometimes. So we very much believe in all of those things. You and I take a coach approach, a coach hat. I probably mean much more in the consultative coaching style. You much more probably in more of a straight style. We have people in our groups that are spiritual formation. We have people that are, I coach with a lot of businesses. I think the point is it's all effective. One of the things I wanted to talk about, I want to hear it from you and your side, is we have had a very long friendship together, but we've also had a big shift in the last couple of years because our friendship grew when you actually moved here. and we ended up at the same church, and then you became part of staff and all of that story, and we just did a lot of work and life and ministry and all kinds of things together. And then you started working on my team part-time as a contractor and now serve in a leadership role. But what's it been now since you moved away? A couple years? Have you been will it be 3 years this fall?
November 2021. So,
Wow, that's crazy.
mo-
Friendship is different when you're face to face and you're in each other's lives and spending a lot of time. And because you and I walk through some really hard things together, you were with me during the loss of our son Eric and just some really difficult seasons. You were walking through divorce at that time. And so we leaned in a lot to one another and to each other's friendship. But when you moved away, it shifted, right? It just does because you're not in proximity. And so I was telling someone this week, actually, I've told 2 or 3 people, I have a very selfish reason that I invited Erica to co-host with me on the podcast in this Doing What Matters. It's because we get to talk. And there's a lot of times that we get in work mode and we're on a work call and we have to get work done and we don't get a lot of what I call deeper conversations. And you're one of the people that I've always done deeper conversations with. But what's it been like for you to move, start new friendship? Just tell us about the journey since 2021.
I stayed, I think, as long as I did because of the safety. My home was that place for me. And obviously, long term relationship with you, your family, our church, those things were such a blessing because they had been that place that gave me some solid ground outside of my relationship with the Lord, my family. It's like God leads me to the edge often, and He's, do you trust me? And I talk about the imagery of a trapeze artist, like you have to open your hands to really be able to embrace whatever God has next for you. And so I knew it was that. It was scary to open my hands and to move. And so even when I moved, I looked back and said, okay, where have I been? That there's already some existing community, but that there's a fresh space. And I had to trust that the long standing relationships, I don't like to call it oldest friends, it's more like boldest friends. So trust that those relationships, it's not like you're leaving them, you're moving forward with them, and they do look differently. So I think for both of us, we've talked about, and some days it's easy, and some days we don't do it as well. There's a different intentionality that has to come. The expectation of what the friendship looked like before, because proximity does offer something that the distance does not. And so it is leaning into it with expectancy and going, not just being that dreaded, like, this is different, but whoa, what new creative opportunities can we create by being in this new space? What opportunities are here?
And I think long-term friendships, and this is in the process that we do, we actually have a little part that we call people blocks when we talk about calendar management and making sure that your calendar is has the right things on it. And one of those things being relationships that you care about. And so when we talk about that, we talk about this idea of long-term friendships. And to continue a long-term friendship uh, does take work, and I don't mean work as in it's hard, but even a relationship like ours that we've known each other a long time, we've been through very difficult things together, traumatic things, if we're honest. And we're not either one of us the same people that we were, 20 years ago. Eric and I are about, I don't know, what are we, 15, 20 years apart?
18. Yeah.
18, something like that.
And then
So
18
she was
to your dog.
27 or 28 when we first became friends. I was probably early 50s. So almost young enough to be my daughter, but not really. And so we've both grown and shifted a lot. I'm now a grandma. My daughter's gotten married. You've moved a couple of years ago. You're in a new relationship that's amazing, and you have new things going on in your world. And so it shifts. Your time is not even the same. My time is not the same. And I think most people find that with long-term friendships, you do have to work at them and figure out what does it look like in this season I actually just got off a call right before we started recording with 2 friends that I met 7 years ago, almost, and I've had them on the podcast, Deanna and Michelle, and we talk about it all the time, the value that we have in our friendship, and I only see these girls in person maybe once a year. One of them travels the world all the time, one of them lives up in Wisconsin, and even though but we talk virtually sometimes for a couple hours at a time, at least twice a month. We used to talk every week. So it's the commitment of I'm all in. And I think you and I have done that over the years. Even when you first moved, yeah, it was a season of difference, but you just takes effort. It takes work. And as we talk about this, you might be thinking of someone that you're like, I miss them. I miss having that commitment and doing things. And I know even when you first started thinking about this, you reconnected with what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, one of your college friends.
I
You got to
actually a friend even that we had become friends in the 5th grade. And so we just started getting to know each other through sports. And we were thick as thieves in junior high and through high school. And then her sports career took off and she was a college athlete. And we went to actually colleges in the same town, but very different experiences. And there was some drifting apart there where we would see each other in the summers and we were always good friends, but we just weren't connected all the time. And honestly, through the real life process, through the people block, and just the question of where are the life giving long term relationships that you value that you want to rekindle or continue? That question for me. And I was like, oh my goodness. It's my dear friend from 5th grade. And we have really both poured into that. And we talk multiple times a week and are very connected. And we live 10 hours apart. So we see each other sometimes twice a year. Sometimes it's 3 times a year. And God has given us spaces where our families have similar kind of spots that we vacation.
ah,
But yeah, it's been a real blessing.
yeah. Well, in today's day and age, it can feel a little bit disconnected. One of the things I've learned about myself is I do love in person. I do love being in the same space. But we're so blessed with the opportunities. You and I are recording this podcast over Zoom. So you can't see us, but we can see one another. And that's how I keep up with the 2 girls I was just talking about. My preference would always be, yes, I'd love to be in person. But in today's age where we can text one another, we can Voxer one another. That's an app that we use through Workspace because I like to hear someone's voice. That's one thing that's important to me that makes me feel connected is to hear the person's voice even in a so I have friends that I Voxer with and can check in with each other. But it's the intentionality. It's the one of the things that several years ago, maybe this was a beginning part of even when I was creating the rule of life tool of the process, the real life process that we have. I remember sitting down one time with a journal, and I'm not a journaler, so that was a miracle in itself, but feeling the need to write down and saying to myself, I don't think I can keep up with all the friends. I was a mom still then, had kids at home. And this was before I knew you. This was before I knew our good friend Terry that passed away. I remember going, what are the names? If I had to choose 5 people that I'm really going to pour into in this season of life, who are those people? And I could probably tell you who all 5 names were that I wrote down back then. And it would be sad to say in this season of life, I'm not close to all of them. I do feel like I could probably call them up and pick right back up where we left off, but for all different kinds of reasons. But in that season, they were the important ones. And that's part of this thing that we talk about with people blocks is we have some categories of like long-term friends, community, family and friends, just identifying. Cause I think when you say the names out loud, that makes a difference for you to talk about your friend from junior high. Yeah, I think that makes a difference. I am making Erica schedule time with to be my friend and show up, and don't I sound sad? But I just know she has a lot to of value to bring. She brings out some different sides in me as we have conversation, She's brilliant. She's an excellent coach, has so much to offer to the world. So I'm really excited about us having these conversations together around the things that matter. What do you see in the podcast as we move it forward? What are you excited about?
As you said, we both approach things so differently. And so I love concepts and ideas, and I'm always quoting something or mentioning something that I've
Always.
read. And yet you are the master of application. And so sometimes you can take these concepts or a great metaphor or something like that and just bring it to real life and help to move me forward or move others forward. And so I think that there's something there, even in a dynamic, that is a really fun tension that we can hold in who
Fiction
we
is a
are and
good
just how we
word.
show up.
We
There's,
do.
I mean, that means that there's a connection, right? If there's
We do.
tension, there's a connection.
See, look at her. She can always bring these great little things in. And it is. We do have a great tension and connection, and that is very true. And I love that. I love that we're always able to complement one another with different ways that we see things, but yet can appreciate each other. And I think that's good for you as the listener because it really will expand where we go with things that we talk about. This podcast is going to be for you if you are trying to live that place of, I'm still out in the world bringing my work, whatever that work could be. It could be that you're still working in a full-time position, brick and mortar, going to work every day, but you also want to connect that foundational part of who are you? What are your needs, your values? What's your personality? You want to continue to be a growth-minded person and have a growth mindset. That's one of the things that I think Erica brings all the time is how do we stay in that growth mindset? And so we're going to talk about that tension of just getting things done in moving our lives forward and growing together and just be sharing our real lives with you as much as I can pull it out of Erica. Sometimes she's a little more private than I am, but that's okay. She doesn't have to give you all the gory details, and you know that you get all the gory details from me, whether you want them or not. But I do want us to bring our whole selves and that you feel like it's a place that you can listen in to two women, two different seasons of life, two different places, both leaders, giving our best in the work that God has called us to do. And if you would like to connect with us more, the best place for you to do that is through our platform that we have, which is actually off of the regular social media platforms of Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those. We use a platform called Circle, and we have a community of people there. It's a free community. You can find that at thereallifeprocess.com, right there at the top of our website. And you can connect with us. Erica and I are both on there, as is lots of other people in that community. And we have those kinds of conversations. That's the best place to connect with us. But Erica also has her own places of connection. If you want to connect with her more, Erica, where would they find you out in the big wide world other than right here on the podcast?
All on the big world wide web. Yes. ericavinson.com is my website. And yeah, you can find out more about fearless living and some of the coaching I do with individuals and groups through there.
As we wrap up here today, what would you like to challenge people to? What feels like something that if somebody's listening in today, what would you want them to walk away with?
As you're leaning into relationships, how can you move from expectation to expectancy? Is the question that I think always is on my heart. And so would just challenge listeners to think about that. And as you notice expectancy and even what that brings in you, is there a step that you would take in moving toward, or maybe it's a releasing even of your own self? You talked about that, Teresa, with even looking at here were the 5 names I wrote down. And I'll often do a concentric circle exercise, God, me right there in the middle. And then who's in the next circle? Who's in the next circle? And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that just because as the circles get wider and someone may be on the exterior circle doesn't mean I value that person any less. And so maybe it's even a releasing of an expectation you're holding of yourself. Maybe it's not about your expectation for someone else, but how could expectancy shift the way that you show up in relationships.
The example Erica just gave of the circles, I think, is a great one to continue with in conversation because I think there is a lot there that we might explore and think about. And it's actually a season of life, I'll be really honest and transparent, that I'm in right now, as you heard me say. And I'm joking about my like desire to, oh, I want to just talk to Erica every week. And so the podcast is the way to do that. I often put things through a work lens, so I'm being selfish and killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But it's also a season of life that I'm in that many people that come into this season of life, your kids are grown, you have much more of an open space, and you could literally, in some ways, be friends with anyone or start new friendships, but yet it's hard. It's hard in a season of life after halfway through your life to go, "Oh, I'm gonna start new friendships," because we know, even as you and I have talked, the value of how long it takes to build really good relationships and trusted relationships. And I am one who likes deep conversation and meaningful conversation, not much of a chit chatter. And so building deep friendships takes time. And so I'm desiring that right now and looking at that, redefining what relationships and looking at circles. So maybe we can talk about that more next week as that matters, because I would say if you're listening, and I know I'm not going to speak for Erica, I'll only speak for me, but all the work that I do, all the time that I spend when I look at my calendar, when it really comes down to it, it is about relationships, whether that's my relationship with God first and foremost, value that as a person of faith first. But then God shows up for me in so many ways through other people.
Mhm.
And so I can have the best calendar in the world, but if it has no room in it or no place in it for the people that I value and the relationships, then it's really not the calendar that I want to see in front of me. So, with that, we will be back next week and gotten to know Erica a little bit. You can get to know her more. Check out her website. You can find her, like I said, inside of our community where you can find me as well and others that maybe is a friend for you as well. We would encourage you to do that. Okay, I'm going to put Erica to the test as the co host. We're going to give her a quiz. I know she knows the answer, but for 295 episodes, I end the podcast with a quote or a phrase. What's the phrase that we end the podcast with each and every week?
We have t-shirts. Every ordinary day has extraordinary moments. You just have to look for them.
You do. This has been one for me. So thank you, friend, for joining me. And I'm looking forward to doing what matters together on the podcast each and every week. So we will talk with you soon, friends.